Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the biggest hinge players in the SEC this upcoming year, broke down 5 different players that I think are just going to have a ton to say about what happens in the SEC this upcoming year. But we'll continue on here, and I apologize for all the technical difficulties. I obviously loaded in a bunch of stuff and it immediately got erased, so not ideal at all, but we'll continue on here. I believe I do not have graphics for this segment. Let me just make sure of that. I do not, but we will definitely break that down and have that totally fixed by tomorrow. I can promise you that, but let's get underway. Let's get into this Wednesday what ifs and talk about some rivalries around college football. I think this is going to be a huge year for rivalries, and there could be a couple of things that happen that change them really forever. And the one I want to start with is likely the biggest what if going into this season overall. What if Michigan beats Ohio State for a fourth straight time? And this one could be just the most consequential overall because when you talk about Ohio State fans, they could. There are a group of Ohio State fans. I am not lying to you, and I don't necessarily disagree with them. They could be 11-0 going into that game. If they lose that game, they want Ryan Day fired. Period. End of story. I can almost promise you that. They could honestly go on to make the playoff, and if they don't do anything other than win a national title, I think they would want Ryan Day fired, especially if he lost this game. So, just to give you an idea, I was born in 2001. Apologies if that made anyone feel old, but I was born in 2001. Growing up, I knew this game was a huge game. I knew it was a huge rivalry game, and I knew that there was so much that went into it. I also knew Ohio State was likely going to win pretty much every single year. That's the way it was when I was growing up. Ohio State just absolutely dominated this game and kind of took a little bit of juice out of it, I'll be totally honest with you, because Michigan just didn't have a lot of things together. They were going through a ton of different coaching changes, not necessarily having a full identity set up there, so Ohio State just controlled it for a very, very long time, and that was just the dynamic. That was the way that things went, and then the last 3 years happened, and Michigan flipped this thing on its head, and now it's Michigan's game, and it's become Michigan's one to lose over the last couple of years. So if they beat them again, if they do this for a fourth year in a row, that means the kids that are coming in as a freshman a couple of years ago will have never beat Michigan. They will walk out that door having never beat the team that they came to Ohio State to beat. That was part of the recruiting pitch. I can almost promise you that. So, and I think the really interesting thing here is Ohio State has a new AD this upcoming year. Ross Bjork just took the job, I believe on July 1st was his first day, and he's not afraid to make those big-time coaching moves. He was the one that got rid of Jimbo Fisher at A&M with that big-time buyout, so he's not afraid of those moments. And I'm not saying that he absolutely will be fired if this does happen, but I can say pretty confidently that there will be a not small group of Ohio State fans that want that to happen. So that is a game that I've talked about it 10 million times, but Ohio State needs to win it. It's the most need win for anyone of any team across any schedule in this entire year of college football. They need that game. I'm just being totally honest. It is insane how much they need that game. But let's move right along here. Another what if that I'm interested in is what if one of the most defining rivalries of the next decade, next 5 years, 7 years, is started this year? And I think when we talk about this, I think everyone knows the two games that we're talking about: Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas UGA. Those are the two games that really have the best chance to make this happen, if you will. And I think it's definitely going to be a very interesting thing because when we got Clemson Bama for the very first time, we didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know that we were going to get 4 just classic matchups that were just incredible and them going back and forth every single year. When UGA and Bama faced off in 2017, we knew that was a special game, but we didn't know what we were going to get coming forward and how aggressive that rivalry was going to get over the next couple of years. Obviously, it kind of started in 2012, but really 2017 was the kickstart of this new generation. That could happen this year. Ohio State and Oregon, I tend to believe, has the better path to make this happen just because I tend to believe going forward the the Big Ten is a little bit more of a conference that can be dominated by one or a couple of teams. Just in general, I tend to believe when I look at the SEC, it's going to be really hard for someone to stay up at the top, and I think UGA might be one of the few teams that can pull it off. But looking at that game, I think the Big Ten, the Oregon and Ohio State, could be one that we see just time and again in Big Ten championships, in the playoff, in regular season, just all over the place. And then Texas UGA is absolutely another one. It's kind of like that UGA Bama one for a couple of years, or at least it could be like that, where they meet in the SEC championship a couple of times. They meet in the national title a time or two. They get involved, in the regular season, and there's a lot of energy around that game. And it could be one of those that every single year we look forward to that one, because we know that that one's going to be very consequential in the playoff race, could be in the playoff at the end of the day. So there's a ton of really, really cool things that could happen this season, but there's a reality where two teams kind of separate themselves from the pack, and it becomes one of those rivalries that are kind of made out of thin air, but are made out of competitive nature and are made out of teams just being at the very top of the sport, which are always very, very fun, like the UGA Bama one. But let's move right along. We'll stick with Bama a little bit here, but what if Tennessee gets its second win over Bama in 3 years? Because I don't think that's something that Bama fans are ready for, and I don't think that's something they're expecting to happen this upcoming year, nor should they necessarily, but it's definitely something that'll be really, really interesting because, as I talked about with the Ohio State and Michigan one, Ohio State dominated that rivalry for quite some time. That was kind of the way that I grew up, was Ohio State's likely going to win that game unless Michigan puts something crazy together on a night. But at the end of the day, this one was way worse. Bama just absolutely dominated Tennessee over and over and over again. And in 2022, they finally got over the drought that was 16 years where they did not get a win over Bama. And these guys play every year. So it's just ridiculous how much domination that Bama had over them. But they finally conquered them in 2022. They got over Goliath. They finished that big thing. If they do it again in 2024, that's a huge turning point in the SEC. That's a huge turning point for this rivalry, and that's a huge turning point for Tennessee for a number of different reasons. Because when I talk about Tennessee, I think they're in a position where they are fighting up. They're fighting up to the Bama, to the UGA level of this SEC. But the reality is, if you beat Bama 2 years out of 3, this is now a real rivalry. This is no longer a game that you're just trying to get a big upset in. It's a game that you're winning and you expect to win. It's a game that you think you deserve from the get-go, and it's a game that you don't need a couple of things to go your way to make a win happen. So I think that's the biggest thing here, is it would totally change the way that Tennessee is viewed in the SEC, in the national conversation. It would change the way this rivalry is viewed in the national conversation. I think we'll get a little bit more love for sure, because it's an awesome one that frankly has been tampered down a little bit by the domination of Bama. But I think Tennessee is one of those teams that just has a massive opening this upcoming year, and if they beat Bama, they have jumped through that opening and might not be coming back for quite some time, because this is a powerful program that hasn't quite hit the right buttons, but it feels like they're starting to down there. So it'll be really, really interesting to watch that. And then finally, I want to break down SMU. And what if SMU makes some enemies in year one in the ACC? And this one might be a little bit weird. I might be a little bit alone on this one, but I think SMU is that team that's going to be really disliked around the ACC. And I don't hate SMU. I'm not necessarily saying like everyone should hate SMU for this, this, and this. I just think that SMU is that team that is going to ruffle some feathers. We've talked about this a little bit on the show, but SMU wields a lot of money. They have some boosters in there that are definitely more than well off, and they absolutely are willing to invest in this program. And it was a little bit stagnant there, and it really was only stagnant because they were in the AAC. They weren't in one of those power conferences that can realistically compete for a national title. Now they are, and the boosters have really showed out. There was a number out there that I'm not sure how true it was, to be totally honest with you, but I believe it was something like $169 million brought in by this athletic department last year. A lot of that is from the donors, and I think it's going to create a little bit of vitriol between some of the ACC teams. So I think this is a team that kind of has sat in the shadows for quite some time, ever since that death penalty way back in the 70s. It's been impossible to get this program back on top, and why I absolutely hate that anyone ever got that, and no one should going forward. But that's beside the point. Totally different conversation. I do think that this is this is a team that is waking up. This is a program that is becoming the program that they're capable of being again, and I think it's going to piss some people off. I'll just be totally honest with you. I think it's going to make some people really, really mad, and I think the way SMU operates behind the scenes, there are going to be some people that take exception, and especially if they beat a team like Florida State or like Clemson or like North Carolina in their very first year. There might just be some energy there that people aren't expecting right now, but I could see it coming very, very quickly for SMU. So that's kind of just a weird projection one that I'm kind of throwing out there, but I think SMU might be a little bit less popular in the ACC this time next year. I'll just put it that way. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Again, very much apologies for all the technical difficulties. I will totally have that fixed by tomorrow. Something must have happened with the saving of all of that. But at the end of the day, I felt like we went off at least remotely without a hitch today. But we'll get back to normal tomorrow. But thank you once again for listening. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing really, really good work across every single sport you could want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.